Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Eau Rouge podcast. Today, Chris is on a lovely little holiday on the west coast of Mexico, so you are just stuck with me for today. And to be honest, there's not too much to talk about, let's be honest, from that Italian Grand Prix. We once again see Max Verstappen storming from further back on the grid to take what turned out to be a relatively easy victory for him. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I guess there's some debate to be had about the race finishing under the safety car. I don't think the fans, the Tifosi, were particularly happy about that, and neither were Ferrari either. And I suppose we can have a little debate by myself whether that was necessary or not. I've got my own opinions. With a couple of other looks at some other drivers and how their races went. But we'll start with the Leclerc and Verstappen battle, I suppose, that we had. Certainly not an on-track battle, but battle of the pit stops, if you like. We had the main turning point in the race was that virtual safety car caused by Sebastian Vettel, and his car broke down on the track, and so the VSC was called out. And I do sympathise a little bit with Ferrari for that, because they had a decision to make. And in that circumstance, when you've got a VSC or even a safety car that's going to be called and you're in the lead, it's much easier when you're in second place to make a decision to react to what the person in front of you is doing. And as we heard, Red Bull's instructions to Verstappen were do the opposite of Leclerc. So if he pits, stay out, and if he stays out, then pit. And ultimately, Ferrari have received a lot of criticism this season for their decisions, and I suppose still there was some questions over what happened today, but they were in a bit of a difficult situation, and I do sympathise with them. I think that they needed to pit Leclerc at that time. I think they got a little bit unlucky because the VSC ended whilst Leclerc was in the pits, as he was on his way out. So it wasn't, there was a bit of bad luck that was going on there as well. But I think that in the end, that did decide the race. But then, of course, later on in the race, we had Ferrari decide to pit Leclerc again and put him on the soft tyres because soft pace looked relatively decent. But he came out and he just didn't have it. He wasn't really. I think he gained about a second on Verstappen throughout the race, or those last kind of 19, 20 laps, and he needed it, a second per lap, really. Let's be honest, to catch him, and he didn't have the pace, and it ended up just kind of falling flat, really. When Ricciardo stopped on the side of the track, and for some bizarre reason they were struggling to remove his car, we had that. There was a moment. I was thinking early on in the race. I was thinking we normally get some kind of retirement, some kind of safety car, some kind of VSC, 5 to 10 laps before the end of the race, which normally causes a bit of chaos. And we got that, but unfortunately, the full safety car had to stay out for the whole time because they could not clear Daniel Ricciardo's stricken vehicle on the side of the road just before I think it was in the middle of the Lesmos maybe, or on the straight towards Ascari, one of those places. And they just couldn't get it out of the way. And they couldn't move it until they had to bring in the crane. And that meant that the safety car had to kind of go around and stay out for a little bit longer than maybe it would have done. It looked like we might get a really good last sort of final lap battle, and to see if Leclerc can have a run at Verstappen, give Verstappen a little taste of his own medicine like he got in Abu Dhabi. But it wasn't to be. And I think there is a debate to be had about the safety car staying out for that length of time to the end of the race. It did lead to an incredibly disappointing end, very anticlimactic, which is really disappointing when we want it, especially in Monza, where you've got a real opportunity to build to get a slipstream and to really try to overtake the car that's in front of you for that kind of the final, especially on the final lap, which would have been really, really exciting. To me, it looked like the car had been cleared by the last lap. So it looked like the safety car had the opportunity to come in maybe a lap earlier, just on lap 52, end of lap 52, just to give everybody one final racing lap. I know the issue that was there was the back markers were still kind of mixed in the middle of it, but I think that in the interests of racing, with maybe in the last 5 laps, do we just say, we carry on? Do we need to let those cars back through? Do we let some of them through, as we've seen again, the big controversy that happened there? I'm of the opinion that for this race, if the back markers were still in the way, then it wouldn't have allowed Leclerc to have a proper run at Verstappen, in which case it probably wouldn't have received, we wouldn't have got the end of the race that we really wanted. But there was certainly an opportunity there, I think, to let some cars through and to just get started again. If you think about when the safety car says they're coming in, they normally turn the lights off about halfway through the lap. And then, of course, the front driver, who would have been Verstappen, starts backing the pack up. I think it might have been, realistic to say that perhaps the rest of the pack could have caught them up by the point, when they would have restarted the race, because especially on that really long straight down to the Parabolica, that is normally when the leader really starts backing the pack up, and to allow everybody else to gain and to close up. And now, aside from that, is there an argument to say that Ferrari made a mistake bringing Charles Leclerc in and putting on the softs? I mean, in hindsight, it's really easy to say that that was a mistake because he didn't have the pace to catch Verstappen. But he had, because he pitted early under the first VSC and Verstappen stayed out, Verstappen had the advantage of, only needing to go for a one-stopper. And then we had Leclerc on the twos. And realistically, would he have been able to get those tyres towards the end of the race to keep them going? It might have ended up being the wrong decision as well. They were in a bit of between a rock and a hard place in that sense. They really didn't have too many options, I don't think. So for this particular race, I sympathise with them. And it did look like they had a fast car this weekend, and they could have, they really could have taken the sword to Red Bull, but we didn't get a chance to see that. I think that maybe if we had seen a little bit more pace from Leclerc on the softs, we could have had a bit of an exciting end, but unfortunately, we just didn't get that in the end. So we talk about Ferrari and their mistakes all season. For this one, I sympathise with them a little bit, and maybe we'll get Chris's thoughts on that for the next race in Singapore. But of course, this win for Verstappen means that he has an opportunity. Mathematically, he can win the championship in Singapore at the next Grand Prix. Now, I haven't worked out the maths myself, but I think what that would mean is if he was to win the race in Singapore, which again, it's looking like that could possibly happen. I think that it would require Leclerc, Checo, and Russell all to either drop points or not finish. So it's unlikely that we're going to see Verstappen winning the championship in Singapore. But it just shows you how dominant he's been this season and that he's on his way anyway. I mean, I think we knew that really from maybe, who knows, earlier on in the season, maybe France around there, maybe even earlier than that. We sort of knew that this was going to be it for Verstappen, that he was, he had the best car, he was dominating the races. I mean, the last 3 races, he's come from the further down the grid, in some cases almost at the back of the grid, to win the race. And when you've got a driver who is in the form of his life, like he is, and he's got a car to back him up as well, there's just not really any opportunity for anybody else, especially when Ferrari are still trying to get their act together. And even if they do that at the end of this season, it's too late, isn't it? They're not going to be able to actually mount a counter-attack to try and stop Verstappen. We've got 6 races left of the season. That's 125 points up for grabs, not to mention the extra point for the fastest lap as well. And also, I think that we're just unlucky, really, that we've had a bit of a season where we've just had that dominance in Verstappen. As an audience, it doesn't really allow for great racing, but we've spoken about that before. We know that Verstappen has got that ability to dominate the sport, and we're all hoping maybe that next season we'll see something special from Ferrari or Mercedes in the future. But wasn't to be today for Ferrari to get their win on their home turf. And the Tifosi were not particularly happy with the end of that race, but maybe soon in the future we'll see a different result. So let's talk about a couple of drivers who had a really good race, of which there were a few today. I mean, I was quite impressed with Carlos Sainz's race today, considering that he had taken many penalties. He started way down in 18th place, and he still managed to finish in 4th. I think that's a really strong race for him. It leaves a lot, like we think about that and think, well, maybe if he hadn't have received those penalties, what could he have really challenged Verstappen for the race win today? I think Sainz has been getting stronger and stronger all season, while Leclerc has been struggling, I think, under the weight of this championship challenge that people were expecting from him. It's not quite gone according to plan. I think Sainz has sort of quietly been working hard in the background to get better, which he's certainly been doing. Still not enough for Ferrari, but he's improving, and he had a very good race today. And then, of course, Hamilton as well, finishing in 5th, despite the fact that he finished in 19th. It was a consistent race. Really, you didn't hear much from Lewis today, did we? About his race. He was just sort of there or thereabouts every time that he needed to be, but he's keeping up that level of consistency. And Checo, a bit of a disappointing race for him, really, coming in 6th. And I mean, he started in 13th, and when you say he went from 13th to 6th, you still would say that's a good result, but maybe if you compare it to his teammate and the other drivers that I've just mentioned, perhaps it's not quite as convincing as it should have been. Race for McLaren, starting 3rd and 4th. I'm sure they didn't expect to finish there in the race, but only one car in the points, obviously Ricciardo retiring. It's a solid race from Lando. But I think George Russell, who I've not mentioned yet so far, but who I do tend to mention in every race, because he's always there or thereabouts, isn't he, in the top 3, 4, 5. He had a really good race today. He looked consistent. He was never really under pressure from anybody other than Verstappen when he moved past him. And I think that George has really proved himself so far this season in a Mercedes that is nowhere near close enough to challenging for titles like it was or has been for such a long time. And so he's really putting in the hard work for this. And I think that he's learning a lot from Lewis, it would seem. And he's having, it was a big strategy call that he made last weekend in order to hold on to that second place or to take that second place from Lewis. And we argued in that podcast whether it was the right decision or the wrong decision. Wrong decision maybe for the team, but the right decision for him. But he's proven that actually he perhaps deserves these finishes that he's getting, certainly ones like that, and he's making those strategy calls. The team are listening to him. That's a lot. That says a lot about him, I think, and how high in what high regard they hold him. So if he keeps going with that, then it's certainly looking like I think he can look back on this season and say this has been a very good season for me. And then if we're looking a bit further down, just sort of in and around the kind of small points that we get at the bottom here, 8th, 9th, 10th, Gasly, De Vries and Zhou. I'll talk about De Vries in a little bit because he won Driver of the Day today and probably deservedly so. But a good result for Gasly in his AlphaTauri. I think he's putting himself out there for Alpine. He beat both the Alpines today. Obviously, Alonso retired, but Ocon didn't even get into the points. They were not looking particularly strong this weekend. I personally would love to see Gasly move to Alpine. I think that it would be a step up. I think it would be removing some very large roadblocks in his way, most notably Checo Perez and of course Verstappen, who's not going to be leaving his team anytime soon. And so, because really realistically where he is, he can't move up to the Red Bull senior team. And so he needs to move sideways. And I think actually this would be more than a sideways move. It would be sort of diagonally up, I think. And I think it would be a really good move for him. So hopefully we'll see some movement on that in the coming weeks. We are still in the heart of silly season. We've still got unconfirmed seats for next season. So maybe we'll see Gasly taking that spot. And Zhou with a decent run out as well. That's only going to help him in trying to secure his contract for Alfa Romeo next year. I think the words coming out of the team are that it's looking likely that he's going to be the one to take that seat again. And I think he's had a solid first season. It's been nothing spectacular, but he certainly, I would say, deserves another season to prove himself. So we'll look out for that. And then, of course, we have got Nyck De Vries, who's replacing Alex Albon this weekend, who very suddenly went into hospital with appendicitis, and he had he had a brilliant race, didn't he? Let's be honest. I mean, he did get voted as driver of the day, and that was certainly well deserved. He qualified in 8th. Obviously, there was a lot of penalties and grid penalties involved in that, but still, he held that position well, and he held it proudly. He didn't look out of place at all on that grid. He's 27 years old, so in some cases, people would be saying he's actually coming to the twilight of his year, or well, maybe not his twilight. That might be a bit harsh considering how long drivers stay in the sport now. But he's certainly he would be peaking really at 27, 28, 29 years old, maybe you would think, and you would certainly argue that that experience has served him really well so far. He's up there now, challenging for race seats in Formula One. Again, he did himself a really good service today. I mean, if you look at him compared to Nicholas Latifi, Latifi started in 10th today, and he finished way down in 15th place. I mean, he was second to last. If you're not, including the people that retired, only Kevin Magnussen was one of the people that actually finished. Who finished behind him. Surely Latifi has run his course now for Williams. Albon has, I think Albon's shown this season that he can compete in that car. He can really push the Williams, not necessarily to the extent that George Russell did, but maybe you could argue that Williams is not as good of a car as it was last year compared to this year. But Albon's slowly been picking up some points. He's slowly been working quite hard on the car. And so if we see a De Vries and Albon partnership next season for Williams, I certainly think that would be one of, if not the strongest team that they could put out there. And I include, Daniel Ricciardo in that, who it looks like is not going to have a drive next season at all. And so for Williams, there's positives that they can take from that. Now they're starting to pick up some points. They're still plumb last in the Constructors' Championship. They are still only on 6 points at the bottom. It shows what a terrible, terrible car they've got. And, it's not looking good for them as a team, is it? But you've got to try and find some positives in that. You've got to try and find some way to look to the future for Williams, if there is one at all. And, we're looking at all of these new constructors potentially coming in. Are Williams at risk being taken over? Don't think there's been any rumours of that. But when you've got a team that's just straggling around at the back like they are, then perhaps it's something to think about. But yes, as I said, Latifi's looking like he's on his last legs, really. He's not really ever competing at any point. There was one moment this season when he topped a practice session. Other than that, that's his biggest achievement so far. And I don't mean to be too harsh on him, but I don't think there's much that we can coming from him. I think he's given it his all. He's been in the sport for an amount of time that he can prove himself, and I think now we've seen that. And then when a driver like Nyck De Vries comes in, who, let's be honest, has not had the same level of experience in Formula One, of course, as he has, and he scores points on his debut. And again, you can argue about the grid penalties. You can talk about that all day long, but realistically, let's be honest here. He scored points on his debut, which is an achievement for any driver. Any driver who comes into Formula One, you can score points on your debut. Doesn't matter how they come, as long as you get those points. So I think he'll be delighted with that. And I think we'll be maybe seeing him in the future. And I suppose the final thing to talk about this weekend, looking at a more holistic overview, I suppose, of Formula One as a sport. Some news broke a couple of days ago that Porsche have called off their collaboration with Red Bull after the talks have broken down. This is just from what I've read, it seems that Porsche wanted a lot more control over the direction of the team. This equal footing, I think, is the Porsche statement that they said. I've got the statement here. It says the premise was always that a partnership would be based on an equal footing. Said this would include not only an engine partnership, but also the team. This could not be achieved. So we're left kind of in the air, really, about whether Porsche are actually going to be joining the sport. They've said that they're interested. They said that they want to come in and be prepared for the new engine regulations that are coming in 2026. But it would seem that if they're going to do that, they either need to find another team to collaborate with, as I was talking about earlier, perhaps maybe working with Williams or something like that. It could be unlikely that they would leave their contract with Mercedes, but who knows? Or that they come in as a standalone team, which would be incredibly interesting. I mean, if you imagine a Porsche Formula One team, that sounds pretty exciting. But hopefully this doesn't put them off. Hopefully there's still something in there. I mean, it's still 3 years away. We could maybe see a new collaboration or some new talks discussed next year. There's still an opportunity. Maybe Red Bull will change their mind. So much can happen over the next 4 years, and I know that these teams, these manufacturers like Porsche, same with Audi as well, they want to get in early. They want to start developing their cars early on so that they're ready for the rule changes, so they are there to hit the ground running, which of course makes complete and absolute sense. But they still have some time, Porsche and Red Bull, to come to an agreement, and so maybe those things might happen in the future. Either way, hopefully it doesn't put them off. I think we're always excited to see new manufacturers coming in to the sport, seeing what they can do with it, what direction they push it in, but also ultimately what we want to see is a more competitive sport, which we got a lot last year in terms of drivers and equal footing, maybe not necessarily in terms of leveling out the playing field, which is something that we would, I think, as many Formula One fans would really like to see, is the midfield perhaps picking up one or two more race wins, challenging, and then the backmarkers who are also, there or thereabouts picking up points every now and then, and not just trailing around at the back. Some would argue that we have a little bit of that, but we'll see what happens with that. And that's it for today's podcast. Thank you so much for listening to Just Me. Chris will be back in 2 weeks' time, where we will start talking about the Grand Prix in Singapore. I'm sure that we're expecting another Max Verstappen win, but there is a potential that Ferrari, it should be a good track for them, so perhaps we can see anything to maybe just break the monotony that we've got at the moment of Verstappen winning. We want to see some other cars challenging for those race wins. But thank you so much for listening today, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.